Hi, Dr. Haskell. Good afternoon. My name is Esha, and I'm a high school student interested in being a veterinarian. I'm so excited to welcome you to the interview series on the careers of veterinarians. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for
Let me
having me.
Let me start with an introduction of our speaker. Our speaker today is Dr. Melissa Haskell from Massachusetts. Dr. Haskell completed her bachelor's degree in animal science from the University of Massachusetts Amherst and her Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from North Carolina State University. After graduation, she completed a large animal medicine internship at Tufts University. She worked as a clinical veterinarian for 3 years at Charles River Laboratories, one of the premier contract research laboratories. Then she worked as a clinical veterinarian and toxicologist at Stryker Biotech for over 3 years, and as a veterinarian and toxicologist at Alexion Pharmaceuticals in Boston, Massachusetts. Over the past 11 years, Dr. Haskell has progressed through various roles of increasing responsibility at Alexion, becoming the executive director and head of nonclinical toxicology. During her long and distinguished career, she has been an integral part of many drug development project teams and has successfully assessed the safety of several drugs that are used to treat rare diseases and positively impacted human lives. Dr. Haskell owns several horses and is involved in the management and treatment of equines. I'm thankful that she's also my mentor and has taught me many veterinarian skills. With this short introduction, let me extend a warm welcome and thank you to Dr. Melissa Haskell. So first, could you tell us about the type of work that you do? Feel free to share your screen and show any slides that you want.
Great. Okay. Yep. I'll share my screen and we can, let's see, we can discuss. There we go. Okay. Can you guys see my slides okay?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go back to the beginning here. Excellent. Don't mind my puppy in the background. He's just drinking. He's making a ton of noise. Okay. There we go. So I'll just put up the slide deck from the beginning. Okay. Excellent. So my credentials here, I'm a DVM, which is Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, and DABT, which is a diplomat of the American Board of Toxicology. That's my toxicology board certification. So like as you said, Esha, my current position is head of non-clinical tox and attending veterinarian for Alexion. I've been there for about 11 years. So how did I get there? Well, in terms of my education, I started with a bachelor's degree in animal science from UMass Amherst. I graduated from there in 2001. And then I was fortunate enough to be accepted to North Carolina State University for veterinary school. And I graduated from there in 2005. I came back up to Massachusetts and did a 1-year large animal medicine internship in 2005, 2006. And then I went into the workforce and I later became board certified in toxicology in 2011. And then my previous jobs, so I've had a pretty varied career. When I first started in vet school, I never would have thought that this is where I would end up. So it's been kind of interesting to kind of look back at my career and look at the things that I did that I really liked, or the things that I didn't like, and kind of how I got to where I am today. It certainly wasn't a straight line. So previously, I worked as a large animal veterinarian, so that was in private practice. So that was sort of the thing you think about when you think about, horse vets. So we traveled around to farms, and I'd treat horses and other large animals like cows or goats. And then we'd see patients in the clinic sometimes, and that way we could manage patients with surgery or sort of complicated medical issues. And we provide both preventative or routine care like vaccines and dental work and that sort of thing, and also emergency care, so wounds and colics and choke and that sort of thing. And so that job was really interesting, really varied. There was a lot of different things to do. There was a lot of on-call work, which was tricky, and a lot of kind of not fun puppy, kitten, horse stuff. There was a lot of like loading up the trucks and unloading the trucks and cleaning your equipment and hiring staff and all that sort of stuff. And then I became a staff veterinarian at Charles River Labs. So this is a contract research organization that provides study support for sponsors that are looking to develop drugs and medications and surgical procedures and that sort of thing. And my role there was to provide care to the animals that were on studies, both from a preventative medicine program standpoint for the whole colony, as well as providing specific scientific guidance on protocol development, surgical services, anesthesia, that sort of thing. And I think that was a really, really good stepping stone for me because I could learn a lot about different species. I worked with a lot of lab animals there, like mice and rats. And also it gave me a really good understanding for conducting the science that is required to develop drugs for humans. And I found that incredibly rewarding. From Charles River, I went over to Stryker Biotech. And there I had kind of a dual role. I was a veterinarian, but I was also a toxicologist. And there I assisted in the development of BMP7, which is bone morphogenetic protein number 7. And that's a growth factor that helps bones heal. So we were looking at that for a bunch of different human bone indications like non-union fractures and that sort of thing. And then I came to my current role here at Alexion, where I still am. Let's see. So some of you might be asking, what is toxicology? I think that's sort of, when I say I'm a toxicologist, that's the first question I get. People say, well, what does that mean? What do you actually do? So I thought I'd sort of define toxicology for everybody, because it's not, if people are thinking about going into veterinary medicine, toxicology is kind of not big on the radar. The first thing you might think of is poison control stuff, right? So my dog got into something he wasn't supposed to eat. What do I do, right? The first person you call is the poison control, and that is toxicologists like me who say, okay, your dog ate chocolate. This is bad for them because, and this is how much he ate, and so this is a problem, and this is what we do about it, right? So that's sort of like the sort of most visible toxicologist to most people. The actual definition of toxicology is that it's a science that deals with poisons and their effects, and with the problems involved, like clinical, industrial, or legal problems, right? So, cases where there's environmental contaminants that adversely affect people, a toxicologist would be involved in that sort of thing. This picture here is of Paracelsus, who lived from 1493 to 1541. He's considered the father of toxicology. And he said, all things are poison, nothing is without poison. The dosage alone makes it so a thing is not a poison. So, for example, like even, water is poisonous if you drink too much of it. Oxygen is bad if you have it in too high of concentrations. Even things that seem really, benign can actually be dangerous in the wrong concentration or in the wrong place or at the wrong time. So I think that's always struck me as very interesting and sort of the basis of what we do as toxicologists. Okay. So what is a toxicologist, now that we sort of understand the basics? So someone like me, we study the safety and biological effects of drugs, chemicals, agents, and other substances on living organisms. And we develop methods to determine what harmful effects there might be, what dosages might cause those effects, and safe exposure limits. So what's going to happen if you take too much aspirin? What's the window that you have? If you really should take 5 milligrams and you take 10 milligrams, is anything going to happen? If you take 100 milligrams, what's going to happen? And then what do we do about it? And this, it's a really interesting industry, because we bring together a really wide variety of fields, right? Chemistry is involved, biology, pharmacology, medicine, both human and animal, and even things like environmental science all come together. And at the end of the day, we help inform policies and regulations that protect human health and the environment. And there's a lot of different places that toxicologists can work, especially, veterinary toxicologists have a really unique role to play in applied or research clinical toxicology, both of humans and animals, environmental toxicology, industrial tox, and regulatory toxicology, which is sort of how we get drugs to market, among a lot of other things. So it's a pretty broad industry, and it's something that, specifically as a veterinarian in this field, you're singularly equipped to have influence and understand things that somebody who is just trained as a toxicologist without the veterinary medical perspective might not understand. So for me personally, it's served me really well in terms of understanding, from an animal perspective, what we need to learn to bring drugs to market, and understanding how the drug specifically might work in a human, human biology and that sort of thing. All right, and then next slide. So my job, what exactly do I do all day, any given day? So overall, my job is to help select the best new drug candidates for development, whether they be biologics, small molecules, mRNA, gene therapy, et cetera. And then working with research teams as they develop those new candidates, assist in the early preclinical development, things like animal models of efficacy. So if we have an animal model of a human disease, and we can test our compounds and see how they work, and see how they might impact disease in an animal basis. And then do we have a candidate that can or should move forward into preclinical safety or toxicology testing in order to get it to the next step in development? And following that, to enable the clinical development and registration of innovative and transformative medicines. So that's absolutely the whole goal of what we do. So we look at our compound and we look at the regulations, and we provide the non-clinical strategy to get that candidate from a drug in a lab all the way through preclinical testing, and then clinical or human testing, and then all the way to registration and approval. We want to evaluate and manage all the non-clinical safety issues and look at risk assessment, do any follow-up studies that are needed. We work with our pharmacovigilance partners once the drug is in human development to say, okay, we didn't see this in animals, but the humans are getting a rash. What do we do about that? Can we run any studies in the lab to assess what's happening, to understand, to make things better for the patients? And then we provide regulatory submission packages, and we work with agencies like the FDA, MHRA, which is in the UK, and PMDA, which is in Japan. So we work really globally to make sure our drugs can be approved and accepted by all these different regulatory agencies, because we're dealing with patients that have rare diseases and they live all over the globe. So we want to make sure that our drugs are available to patients wherever they might be. And so that requires a lot of care and a lot of effort in making sure that each country's regulatory agencies are discussed and understood, that what we need to do to get the drug approved in that country specifically. And then, so just a little bit about drug development, because that's kind of the focus of what I do. So some of you guys might not know, it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort to get a drug approved. So for every one drug that's approved by the FDA, we started with an average of 15,000 compounds in early drug development, and only about 500 of those progressed into the preclinical work that is needed. And then only 10 of those compounds made it into the clinic, just to get that one drug approved. And the total time it usually takes, if you look at the bottom of the screen, is almost 15 years to get a drug from the day that it's invented in a lab until the day that it's approved by the FDA and able to go into a patient. Is 15 years, which is really amazing. It's very long and it's very complicated. So there's a lot of things we have to do from start to finish to get that drug over the line to market. We have to make sure that the drug is safe. We have to make sure that it works, and we have to make sure we understand the molecule and any side effect that there might be, and how to make sure that it's going into the right patients at the right time, at the right dose. Okay. And then, so I thought, I don't know, Esha, I put in this part about rewarding aspects of toxicology. What do I really like about my job? Because it's one of those things where it's not, when I went to school to be a vet, I thought I was going to be a horse vet, and now here I am kind of taking a left turn into toxicology. And what about it that I like? Well, I think it's a very difficult job. Being a horse vet was difficult from a standpoint of, each individual horse in front of you carries with it so much sort of emotion, and with the owner, and trying to fix that particular horse for that particular owner. So that was stressful in its own way. But this is stressful because you're trying to bring a drug to market to help, many, many, many patients. Even in rare disease, there's lots of patients. So I find that, it's a difficult job. It can be stressful to be tasked with ensuring, the safety of these drugs going into development, right? When I run non-clinical studies to develop drugs, I'm doing that specifically to make sure that they're going to be safe to go into humans. And that, I think, is that's a heavy burden to bear, right? We want to make sure that we never send a drug into humans that's not safe, but we also don't want to not send a drug to humans that is safe, right? So we have to very carefully analyze the results of our trials and make sure that we understand the results, and that we understand the implications of those results, whether they be good or bad, and that we don't make the wrong decision. So I think that's one of the toughest parts, but also the most rewarding, right? When we do it right and we have a really good drug, it's just incredibly rewarding to bring safe, effective, transformative medicines to patients with rare diseases who really need them and don't have any other options. I think for me, early in my career at Alexion, it became really clear to me how much of a patient-centric organization that we really are. And in order to do that, what we would do is bring patients in and listen to them and just have them tell us, what is it that you need? And they would sort of tell us their journey from when they first got sick to how long it took them to get diagnosed, which is often a long time. And then when they were able to find treatments and how that has helped them and impacted their life. And, I think that I find really inspiring. I think one of the most inspirational things that I've ever seen was a patient came in and they were talking about how the drug had impacted their life. They had a rare disease that made it so not only did they have issues and sicknesses, but it impacted their ability to have children. And then when they started taking one of our drugs, their health was restored and they could then have a child. And so they could have a family that they thought that they would never be able to have, and not only for the patient, but for the patient's parents, who then were able to have grandparents. This was a really, really impactful thing for me to hear, because we focus so much on the patient and getting drugs to the patient that sometimes you forget they have a whole family around them, right? A family that supports them and loves them and cares for them. And if you make their life better, you make their whole family's life better. So in a way, treating rare disease, you think you only have a small group of patients that you're treating, but you're actually treating this whole, family, this whole environment of people around them. And so I think that I felt that was really inspiring and really motivational to keep working and keep striving to find new drugs and bring drugs to market for patients that need them.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's super interesting. Thank you for sharing all about your work and the rewarding aspects of your career. Um, and like everything you said, it's really helpful information, and gave me an idea of kind of what to expect in the future too.
Mhm.
So, could you discuss about the best career decision that you made, any setbacks that turned out to be an advantage, and any considerations as you made different choices throughout your career?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So I think in general, the biggest career decision I made, the best one, was just to be really open to new opportunities. So, not just having tunnel vision that I was just going to be a horse vet and that was all I was ever going to do, because I would have missed this incredibly rewarding pathway that I didn't even realize was really a thing when I was in vet school. And I think part of sort of the challenges in it, when I was a horse vet, I wasn't really totally satisfied, but I didn't really know what to do about that. And so sort of finding mentors and looking at my other options. And then, I had done some research in vet school, so it wasn't such a huge leap to go into Charles River. And then when I was there, learning so much and then figuring, okay, I really like working in research, but at Charles River, we were a CRO. So we contract research organization. So we ran studies for sponsors for other companies. And so you would see the little pieces, but you would never see the whole thing from start to finish. And then I went to Stryker where that was exactly what I did. I worked with a drug from beginning to end. And then Stryker had some setbacks with one of their molecules in development, and we closed the site was closed, and I lost my job. And I thought that was the worst thing that had ever happened, because the job was so great. I really loved my job. But then, an opportunity opened up at Alexion, and that has really made an amazing difference in my career. And it's even a better job than it was at Stryker. So I think, sometimes looking at that setback of, oh man, I lost the best job I ever had, really just opened a door for me to find even a better one, and continue to grow and develop in my career. So I think sometimes, looking at the silver lining, or things that you originally think are bad, and then they turn out to be actually a good thing for you, as time goes on.
Yeah, that's really great advice.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you believe the profession has changed during the span of your career and how you and other successful vets have adapted to this.
Yeah, that's a good question too. I think it's really changed a lot. So mainly as a small animal or large animal vet in private practice, one of the big things that's changed is how much technology there is. So when I was in school, digital radiographs were kind of just becoming a thing. And I remember my first job as a horse vet, we had films, we had x-rays on film, and you'd have to take the x-ray, and you'd have this whole pile of films, and you'd bring them back to the clinic and you'd run them through the machine. And if any of them were bad, you'd have to go back and retake them. And then during that year, we got this digital x-ray machine, and it was amazing because you could you never had to go back and forth because you had the images right there in front of you in real time. But also those machines were so good that all of a sudden you were seeing detail in the radiographs that we couldn't see before. So then it became this race to understand, is that normal? And I just haven't ever seen it before, or is this like an abnormality that we're seeing in the radiograph? And so there was a lot of learning curve and a lot of growth to that in the practice to say, okay, I think this is normal, I think this is not normal, and kind of, sort of redefining normal, because now the equipment allowed you to see so much. And similarly with ultrasound and all these advanced imaging techniques, genetic screening and whatnot, there's just so much more available that allows us to practice better medicine. I think too, it can become a little tricky because there's so much that you can do that you can get mired in running a million diagnostics. And that can be expensive and time consuming and not always needed, right? So I think it becomes more of an art of practicing medicine to understand what you really need when, and what things you need to improve upon, and what things were perfectly fine the way they were, right? Standard surgeries and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I'm curious, which has been more valuable in your career, your education or your experience?
Well, I think they're both absolutely essential and valuable. Here actually, there we go. I have prepped for this. So I think, I wouldn't be able to be where I am today without the basic education, right? Without my bachelor's degree and my veterinary degree, there'd be doors that just wouldn't be possible, right? Like you can't be a pathologist unless you have a degree, either a veterinary degree or a medical degree. Um, so I think that whole breadth of education, undergrad, vet school, internship, and getting ready for boards, all was essential. But the experience that I have and just sort of the development of my career, the sort of on the job training, has been just as important, because there were things that you couldn't really learn in school, like GLP procedures, right? Good laboratory practice, which is kind of a standard, gold standard of how we do science, how we document science. And it's standardized across the world so that any study that I run in the US, a study that's run in France, a study that's run in Canada, when a regulatory agency looks at that, it's all to the same standard, right? And that's really important. But they don't teach that in vet school, and they don't you don't really can't take a college class to learn that sort of thing. So I think they've both been incredibly important, like two halves of a whole. But I think another thing that's just super important, I really can't overstate the importance of, is having mentors, having people in your life that have kind of been down a similar path that can give you advice and guidance. And people that really are invested in your success from like a careful, thoughtful sort of guidance perspective. People that know of opportunities that you wouldn't know of, that can help get you those opportunities, or put your foot in the door, or say, hey, have you ever thought about this cool thing over here that you never did before? I know a guy who does that. And I think when I was an undergrad, that was just incredibly important, because you know, in prepping to go to vet school, there's so many things you have to do to check all the boxes to get in. But they also help form your experience level and help show you what you might want to do and what you might not want to do, right? Maybe you always wanted to be a small animal vet, but then you volunteer in a small animal vet clinic and you're like, oh, this is awful. I don't ever want to do this. And it's important that you learn that before you get there. But also for things like that you just don't, opportunities you might not even know are available, right? When I was an undergrad, one of my professors said, hey, um, I needed a job. He said, if you need a job, he's like, I got a guy for you. This guy, Matt Parsons, I went to undergrad with him back in Michigan. He owns a farm down the street, and his farm raises pigs and sheep for research, very high health, what we call SPF, for specific pathogen free animals. And you can learn a lot from them. They have baby pigs born every day, baby lambs born all the time. You could learn so much from them. And so I went over there and I started working there, and I worked there for years. I actually lived on the farm for a time when I was an undergrad. And that was one of the most joyful experiences of my undergrad, because I really felt like I was part of a family. They took really good care of me. But also I learned so much about how to run a farm, what you have to do to make the hay and feed the animals and cut the corn, and also, how that ties into research. You need these animals, like the sheep we were doing some really cool pregnancy research on. And so one of the local vets would come and ultrasound the sheep, to make sure, to see when they were pregnant, how long the gestation was going and stuff like that. So I think, I never would have had that opportunity if not for my professor saying, hey, I know a guy, that could help you. And it turned out that, at that farm, one of the brothers was a veterinarian at Penn. And so when I was looking at vet schools, he was really valuable to me in terms of, hey, you might want to consider this or that, as you're thinking about vet school. So things like that, I just, just super, super important. Even more so than where you go to school is, the people around you that can help you and, mentor you and shape you and, open opportunities for you.
Yeah, that's really helpful. That's really great advice too. Now I was wondering if you could tell us about some of the challenges faced by veterinarians.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, when I was a practicing veterinarian, I think one of the most, biggest challenge for me and for I think a lot of vets is that you're not just dealing with the pet, the patient, the horse, the dog, you're dealing with the owner, right? Because you can fix the dog or the cat or the horse, but you need the owner to be involved in that. And sometimes that can be really challenging, not just because you have to take your medical knowledge and you have to distill it in a way that an owner can understand, who's not a scientist and not a veterinarian. And then you have to work within their constraints, whether they're financial or lifestyle or biases of some kind. And it can be really frustrating to have obstacles in front of you, in helping a patient that you can help, but you can't overcome them. So, for example, diagnosing a puppy with really severe hip dysplasia, and he needs $5,000 worth of hip surgery, and that's not a possibility for his owner. And so you can't fix the animal the way you want to. And then on the other hand, having, an animal that, the owners are wonderful and they have resources and they do anything they could to help their pet, but the disease that they have isn't fixable, right? They have inoperable cancer or something, and there's nothing you can do. And so both those situations are equally frustrating for different reasons. And I think, this is something that is so difficult for us as we're veterinarians. We're passionate about helping animals and fixing them. And when you have the ability to do it, but you can't do it due to circumstances beyond your control, that can be incredibly, emotionally difficult. And I think it's, important for students coming in that want to be vets to understand that you really need support system and you need coping mechanisms. And I think this is something that vet schools are starting to understand and teach more about. They call it compassion fatigue or burnout. But it's really important. I had some situations when I was an intern, and the students around me would just have such a hard time understanding that sometimes you can't fix something, right? Or we had a foal come in and he had really severe kidney issues, and we ended up having to euthanize him. And the student on the case was just so angry about that, because they said, no, you can give him sub-Q fluids and you can give him medicines and you could kind of limp him along. But the understanding that this is a horse, this isn't a dog or a cat that's going to be in your house, right? This is a horse that's very expensive to care for, that's going to need round the clock care that the owners can't provide. And so, it's not humane to expect those people to do that for that animal to suffer that way just to be alive. And so I think sometimes, people understanding the limitations that we have, and that people around them might have, that can be challenging, kind of understanding someone else's perspective and what someone else is going through. I think it's really important. And another huge challenge is going to be student loans. I say this because, student loans are a big topic of conversation. I think it's a huge challenge, and I think it's something to really carefully consider, when people are deciding what undergrad institution to go to, what vet school to choose. There's this great organization called VIN Foundation. It's Veterinary Information Network. They have a foundation that has a ton of information about, student loans, they have this whole map where you can go and look at the different vet schools and see which one would be the most expensive or least expensive for you, depending on whether you're in state or out of state and the living expenses and such. And also a lot of information about debt repayment and the debt repayment programs that might exist. I think it's important to consider that going in, because no matter how much passion you have for your career, you have to be able to eat, right? You have to be able to have your life, move forward in a functional way. And if you have to spend all your money on paying back your student debt so that you can't have a child or you can't have a house, that is a huge detriment. So I think it's important to consider that no matter how much you love being a vet, it's only part of your life, and you have to consider, your whole life when you're making financial decisions like that. My sincere hope is that over time, Congress will figure out how to deal with this situation, because we need people to be vets, and we need people who don't have just a ton of money to be vets, right? We need everybody to be vets, because the most diverse population of people we have, and people who understand that other people have financial constraints, are really important in this profession. I have to say I was incredibly fortunate when I went to school that I got a lot of scholarships to go to UMass, and I went as an in-state student. And when I went to North Carolina State, that college was really heavily subsidized by the fine people of North Carolina. It was a state school. They got a lot of state funding. And my tuition there, once I became a resident, was $7,000 to go to veterinary school in the number 3rd ranked vet school in the country. And I know it costs a lot more than $7,000 to send me to that school. And it was because the taxpayers of North Carolina helped fund my education. And that doesn't really happen as much today. For example, at Tufts, the tuition there is like $50,000, because the Massachusetts taxpayers don't fund as much in advance, so that the vet student has to take on all that debt onto themselves with a fairly high interest rate. So I think it's something that's really important to think about, when you're going through. I wouldn't trade my career for anything. I love every minute of it. I feel incredibly fortunate to be in the position I am. But part of the reason I'm here is because when I graduated, I only had about $100,000 worth of debt, and it was at like 2% interest, 2.5% interest. So it was really, really manageable for me, even on a fairly low salary right out of school. I think it's not everyone gets to say that. Sometimes people come out of school with a lot more debt and at a much higher interest rate, and it really hampers their life. So I think looking into the different debt repayment programs and looking into VIN Foundation, and really carefully considering what vet school you're choosing and having the financial discussion be a big part of that is important.
Yeah, 100%. Those are some really important points that you touched on. So, one last question. Could you give me an idea about the key value sets, personal attributes, and soft skills that make veterinarians successful?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the most important thing is going to be determination and perseverance. Getting through undergrad and vet school is a long, long, long path. And so don't get discouraged, if you don't get accepted on your first round or your first choice of school. It can be really challenging. A lot of my classmates, they had their heart set on one school and they didn't get into that school, and it was really tough for them. So I think determination, perseverance, really huge. And just the grit, right? Just to buckle down and get the work done, because it's going to be a long slog. There's a lot of stuff you have to do. And some courses you'll love and some you really won't, right? Some people love anatomy and physiology. For some, it was really difficult. I remember, honestly, I loved toxicology when I was in school. I didn't like pharmacology so much. Anatomy was awesome. We had this great professor, but some of my other classes were really challenging. I think fish medicine I didn't really like very much, but you still, you have to buckle down and do it. And I think another piece is taking initiative to look for opportunities outside of just school hours, right? Just going to undergrad and doing the work and getting a 4.0, that's not going to be enough, not only to get into vet school, but also to set you up for understanding where you want to go in your career. So, getting work or volunteer experience is going to be really important to help you figure out if you want to practice, or you'd really rather do research, or if surgery is amazing, or you really like shelter medicine, like any of those aspects. One of the best things about being a vet is that there's just so much you can do with that degree. I could just work in a lab for the rest of my life, or I could go and, spay shelter animals, or, I could go be a fish vet. Actually, one of my colleagues one of my favorite colleagues. He was really big into herpetology, fish, reptiles. Right now, he is in Dubai, and he has been hired to help put together the world's biggest aquarium in Dubai. So he's helping build this collection of amazing fish and various other little creatures, and he's having the best time of his life. That's amazing, right? And we have the same degree, right? So I think seeking out every possible opportunity to learn what part of it is of vet med you like is important. I mean, I did the weirdest jobs. I was a stall mucker. I was a teaching assistant. I ran the sheep breeding lambing program. So I would set all the sheep up to get bred in the fall. And then I would assign the students in the class a sheep. And then when the lambs were born, I would be there helping the lambs be born, helping the students with that. I collected boars for the repro lab. I even worked in Dr. Robles' cloning lab, making the micropipettes so they could do the little injections, the little embryo injections. That was really cool. And then they let me actually do some of the micro injections once I got good enough at making the micropipettes. I had a job super ovulating pigs for a small biotech, and I had an office job to help me network and just to make some money. So I think there's so much opportunity out there, and it's just it's a lot of it is just showing up and asking for opportunities, having a good work ethic, and just like being interested and excited about all the different facets of the profession will get you really far.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing everything today. I really appreciate you chatting with me and sharing all your valuable information. Your career journey is very inspiring, and I wish you continued success and an amazing career.
Great. Thank you so much. I really had a good time chatting with you, and would certainly be really happy to answer any questions if anybody has them. If people want to reach out, I'm really happy to chat more or answer any questions.